Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the chief underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now, here's your host, Dr. John Cook.
Welcome once again to another edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host this week, Dr. John Cook, and with me today is a returning guest, the Reverend Dr. Karen Tate. We've had her before talk about her book, Goddess Calling. And we have another book now, an anthology called Goddess 2.0, Advancing a New Path Forward. Karen, welcome to the program.
Thank you, John. Happy to be here with you today.
This is an interesting collection of thinking by a variety of people steeped in the divine feminine, and they are, some call themselves pagan, some Wiccan, there's Isop worshipers. They're from all sorts of walks of worship of the divine feminine. But I want to start with your foreword, where you talked about looking at what's going on in the world today in a patriarchal dominated society. So there are several problems you list, and you're a partnership practitioner, but you're looking at how the economy is affecting people, what's going on in terms of the environment. Could you just say a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I think, first of all, most people, when they hear about goddess spirituality, even some practitioners themselves, they don't understand the full scope of what it encompasses. Some are still learning about goddesses in ancient history, or traditions that worship goddess, or that maybe they've just discovered that goddesses were worshipped 30 or 40,000 years ago, long before a male god, and that's pretty profound in itself. Especially if you have a background like I do, coming from the Bible Belt. It's kind of shocking to learn that information's been kept from you. But then when you start to discover that, that we have, proof that some of these societies actually lived life very differently than we do in our patriarchal world. They weren't disconnected from nature. They weren't disconnected from their bodies. So much more of the world and ourselves were sacred. There was such a different worldview, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And part of that worldview, we believe, was a feminine face of God at the center of their cultures. So what is that? Why is that relevant? Well, we believe that we can make a direct correlation from losing a feminine face of God and the values that accompany that feminine face of God in our world with so many of the values that are now marginalized: caring, sharing, equality, justice. And we ended up with a patriarchal world of domination and exploitation. We often say, we lost the feminine face of God, and you can connect the dots to domestic violence, to women not having equal pay for equal work, to man's belief that he can exploit the resources of the world for his gain, rather than being a wise steward of these resources. And so what it really comes down to, I guess in a nutshell, is what I learned in goddess spirituality, and that is goddess is associated with partnership and respect. And so now I look through this lens when I look at most things. Are we seeing respect and partnership, or are we seeing domination and exploitation? And when you look around the world, I think we are seeing a lot more domination and exploitation. And, fortunately, I think the world is rising up, and slowly but surely, by different methods and different places, people are awakening to this. And I hope in the next few years here, we will be changing the world. And I think one of the tools we have to change the world so that we have a better quality of life for the most of us, one of the tools is the ideals of the sacred feminine. Mm-hmm. And they sort of offer us a roadmap to replace the dominator culture that we live in with something that works for most of us rather than just a few of us.
You characterize the United States very well in this patriarchal model of predator capitalism, bad trade deals for labor, people working longer hours for lower wages, income disparity, climate change, trickle-down economic technologies. But at the social level, it's really interesting because this really is, if we recognize the divine feminine, this really is a feminism movement issue that men still believe they have a religious mandate to control women's sexual lives, what they can and cannot do with their bodies, and really continue to treat women as chattel or property rather than as partners.
Well, true, and I want to stress this isn't all men, and it's interesting, mythology shapes our culture. And what mythology teaches us ends up, being the roadmap for a society. And you look at the Garden of Eden myth, for instance. One of the feminist foremothers who was instrumental in my thinking was Merlin Stone, who wrote the book When God Was a Woman. And she talked about how what an impact the Garden of Eden myth had on humanity. And anybody who thinks myths are not important, look at the effect that myth has had on all of humanity. Look what it's done women. Look at the gender disparity it has created and how it's marginalized, discredited women, even made some people hate women. Who's to say that doesn't, that isn't where the first misogyny comes from. Mm-hmm. And this whole so we have the Garden of Eden myth, and where you have a male god, you end up with male leadership and male authority, and anything that's not male is then subjugated. It's marginalized. It's discredited. So we end up with the only other gender on the planet subjugated by male authority, and that has had repercussions and a ripple effect for thousands of years. Now, we realize that that these values that we recognize as feminine, they've also been marginalized in our society. But it's a mindset. It isn't just a gender thing, because there are many men who realize that having marginalized these values that we label feminine has led the world to the imbalance and the injustice and the exploitation we're suffering. And there are women who have benefited from the status quo, have benefited from patriarchy, as it is, so they continue to perpetuate it. So, it's really, maybe it started out a gender issue, and it still is to a certain extent, because in general, not always, I think we are more likely to have women trying to perpetuate feminine values, but it isn't. It isn't a strict case for, women got all the answers and men have caused all the problems. Yeah. I hope I'm making that clear.
Thank you for that. It's important for those of us who are pro-feminist to not feel like patriarchy discards all of masculinity. But, the truth is the influence of the most powerful patriarchal religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, do subjugate women. And if we're going to free women from an awfully long oppression, a history that most of the world is familiar with, of warfare and making everything in the earth something that man has dominion over, we do need to look at the loss of the feminine, the loss of the soul at some point.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and we have to have the courage to do this, and it's not easy, because we know now that a society that marginalizes its women is more likely going to be a society that's going to exploit its resources. It's going to be a warlike society. These behaviors and values go hand in hand. So, if we can somehow shift the paradigm and recognize that we don't have to have power over, that, we basically, we all want the same things. We all need the same things. If we could figure out a way to have what Riane Eisler has talked about, I think she's been a great moral compass, with the idea of partnership and caring economics. I believe that, we can solve the disparities, the inequities, the injustice, the domination, the exploitation, simply by I guess maybe it isn't simply, but it's a simple concept in a way. When you think about it, and how could it, why is it so hard to understand that partnership, creating win-win situations rather than having to dominate and have power over, then then there are more of us with a better quality of life. And and when I talk about domination, I'm talking about companies who exploit and dominate their employees. We've heard all the stories. We've lost our benefits. People have lost their pensions. They make less money than they did 10 years ago. The American dream is dead. Some people don't even want to have a minimum wage, much less increase the minimum wage. Some people want to privatize Medicare. I mean, it's these ideas that don't invest in our human capital, but instead want to invest in more corporate power, more, the military-industrial complex, wants to allow, big pharma to continue to, exploit, people for the bottom line. There's so many things. It's environmental. It's, it's big pharma. It's, all of these, different aspects of our life. Mm-hmm. It's the militarization of the police. It's, spending all of our money on bombs and missiles instead of, research and development, or our crumbling infrastructure, or, again, investing in people so that maybe they can have a better quality of life. We're being very short-sighted for greed, and I think greed and domination are what can destroy humanity and the planet.
You dedicated this to Bernie Sanders and his wife, and there is politics in this, and it needs to be said that you don't turn away from that at all. Your concern about forests are not cherished anymore, that we're cutting down to supply paper and packaging and establishing cattle farms to supply and crops to supply biofuels, and mountains are being hollowed for their minerals, and to construct nuclear reactors and computers and mobile phones, and all of that predator capitalism is part of what some of your authors in this anthology are discussing, but you don't shy away from the fact that we do have to participate in the world to turn things around politically.
Yeah, it's ridiculous to think that we can just pray and meditate away the domination and the exploitation. We have to reconcile our spirituality and our politics. So if we're, for instance, an eco-feminist, then we better not be voting for people who don't care about the environment, who don't care about the fact that we only have 17% of women in leadership positions in academia, religious institution, corporate America, politics. I mean, there's a lot that needs to be fixed. But I think just one aspect of it is really looking at the fact that our spirituality and our politics have to be in sync, and there has to be spiritual courage from people to do the right thing. And I think we also have to, start reassessing our values. I mean, do we want to be a people that's only about, that's only about assets? I mean, do we want to be a people that's so short-sighted that we don't realize our resources are not infinite? Should we be looking at economic development instead of economic growth? I mean, this is a big subject, and no, we can't shy away from politics because it's our budgets or morality, and morality is spirituality. It's all connected.
There are 3 or 4 authors, I believe, who mentioned the fact that when Apollo showed pictures of the Earth from the moon, that was a very telling moment, a very awakening moment for many people to see the fragile planet Earth as a living thing. Talk about some of those spiritual values like healing and environmentalism.
Well, we only have one planet, and and there seems to be such short-sightedness in the name of greed. And it's astounding, really, when you think of it. It's amazing to me that we're probably more advanced from an educational standpoint than we've ever been on the planet. But are we wise? What are we doing with this knowledge? Why are we not, thinking about, our, what are we here for on the planet? What is the real meaning of life? I think it calls all of this into question, and and we've gotten to the point where, for some people, they judge themselves, they value themselves, they judge society, everything out there with a price tag. And I think we have to get to the point where we look at the world in a much more holistic way, because we all have to share this planet. And what kind of world do we want to live in? Can we, in good conscience, dominate? Continue to dominate and exploit, and not expect those who are dominated and exploited to fight back? And if we really are spiritual beings, if we really do believe we're interconnected and we are all part of the divine, then why would you want to oppress someone who is connected to you? If you really are a spiritual person, how can you justify or rationalize this, the evil that you do other people? It used to be greed was one of the 7 deadly sins, and now greed and the search for wealth. We never ask ourselves when is enough anymore. It's just this. Some people are just on this quest for more and more and more and more, with no consideration for who it hurts or the effect of this insatiable greed.
Mm-hmm. One of the authors says that love is the essence of worship, and that, to me, is one of the things that seems to get lost in some of the more traditional patriarchal approaches to what our sacred texts tell us is so.
Well, yeah. I mean, and maybe it's even become cliche. Love is the answer, and if that's too hard to swallow, if the idea of loving your enemy is too much, and I think it is too much, then for the person who can't go there, because look, so many have discarded Jesus's teachings. It's such hypocrisy. But if loving your enemy or someone across the world who you can't relate to in the least because they have a different color skin or a different god or they speak a different religion or whatever it is, at least think of the world in terms of partnership. And I think, that's how we kind of go back to that, because, it's this idea of if we can be in partnership with the world, then, we don't spend our resources in stupid ways. We allocate our resources for the betterment of humanity instead of using our resources to dominate and exploit. And I want to say, the people who I think dominate and exploit, it's not just greed that is at play here. I think it's also fear. I think we're either motivated in this life by love and goodness, or try to be, or fear. And I think in some cases we have such a fear of the other, that it forces us into this place where we must dominate it. If we fear it, then our natural reaction is to try to dominate it. And that it goes to, I think education is a big key to all of this too, and especially here in the United States. I was lucky enough to travel a good bit when I first came to Goddess spirituality, because I wanted to travel to a lot of the places around the world where Goddess used to be worshipped. And in that travel, the unexpected realization was how much we are all alike, how our diversity is such a gift. And I think here in the United States we're so isolated with these two oceans on either side of us that it makes it really easy to ignore the rest of the world as if we are the only important thing, or people on the face of the earth. Mm-hmm. I think that isolation has really helped encourage this separateness that I think divides us from the rest of the world. That's not to say, Western culture in Europe is doing fine, but I'm just saying here in the United States, I think our isolation has contributed to our sense of separateness rather than we're in partnership with the world.
Yeah, I want to continue with that notion of fear, though, because I believe Amy Peck's essay about reviving the serpent deals with the downfall of the whole human species because women were no longer the advisors and the wise counselors and the interpreters of the divine will of the goddess, but they were hated and feared in the remything of religious thought. And you mentioned Adam and Eve in particular, but...
Well, I think there is, I think there is a fear of women by men, and you chime in here if you would. I have this idea that some of the religious teachings have made, I think, men fear women, whether it be because women have a sexual power. Or just the idea that, women's bodies, we can produce life, we can bleed without dying. There was a time that was considered very magical, very powerful. And then, we end up with, this misogyny comes along with patriarchy, and patriarchy does a number on logic. There becomes this great reversal, and suddenly patriarchy, the male wants to take over the roles that used to be the roles of the feminine. You have Athena's birthed from Zeus's head, as if Athena doesn't have her own mother to be birthed from. Some say that circumcision, that bleeding of the male, was intended to mimic menstruation. Menstrual blood. We know that it was once coveted because they thought it was magical, had these, maybe even the power to give you immortality. Suddenly, that that thing that is produced from the body of a woman becomes taboo, dirty, unclean. Some people thought it could even bring on drought and all manner of evil. Women are relegated to the menstrual hut. We go from, women being, magical, powerful, empowered, connection, the life givers of the world, to relegated to the menstrual hut, So it's this shift. And it seems like when we lost the value that values life, because I think that's what the feminine represents, nurturing, caring, sharing, life-giving. I mean, if you can negate those things, if you can devalue those things, then, you can send a bomb across the world and kill innocent civilians and sleep really good at night, because we fear. Fear, I think, comes into it as well. We fear the other. We fear our sexuality. We're in a state.
Yes.
And I think we can lay a lot of these problems at the doorstep of patriarchal religions, who sent the world out of balance, who taught us to negate these, this life-giving, nurturing, caring, sharing sexuality that makes us human.
That's an important point raised by another one of your authors in the anthology about the age 6,000 years before the Common Era in Old Europe, when there were peaceful, egalitarian, settled, artistic, matrifocal, matrilineal people worshiping the goddess, and that they were much more human and they were much more sexually liberated, and it wasn't a society that's structured like the patriarchal societies are today. And she actually describes an idyllic world in which we could return to that state.
Well, I think we've been brainwashed, indoctrinated, all in the name of giving certain people power. Whether it be men to have power over women, or it's religion to control the masses, or corporations to control the natural resources, for greed. It's all domination, isn't it? It's all power over. It's all control. And you see, the sacred feminine isn't about that. The sacred feminine, it's more about your connection with nature, our connection to one another, enjoyment of life. It's not about negating this life for salvation in the hereafter, and I think that's a big part of it, and I remember when the movie Avatar came out, which to me, I look at that movie as a almost kind of goddess church, if you will, and I can't wait for the next one. But where I'm going with this is that movie was so positively received. It charged people so much that it scared a lot of people too. One of the Pope's representative came out and said, "Nature will never replace religion." Well, I hate to say wake up call, but nature used to be religion, and also too, in this whole idea of evangelical Christians went mad when that came out as well, because it was showing a whole different worldview of our interconnection with each other, and humanity's connection to nature as well, rather than there are aspects of Christianity that have themselves all tied up in making money. I mean, the idea of Jesus's teachings have sort of got swept beneath the rug.
I only have 1 minute left, but I did want to mention that you are looking at the creation of a goddess Bible and you mentioned some of our favorite extra biblical literature, which we've talked about with authors and editors on this show. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Thomas didn't make the cut into the canonized Bible for reasons that have to do with how they wanted to shape politics and religion in that day. And I look forward to what you come up with in that regard.
Well, thank you. It is a daunting task, though, isn't it?
To say the least. This has been a fascinating discussion. Unfortunately, we're out of time. This is a very thought-provoking book by the Reverend Dr. Karen Tate. The anthology is called The Goddess 2.0, Advancing a New Path Forward. I remind our listeners, if you don't get to catch our regular broadcast, you can also find us on YouTube at Good Books Radio, Strong and Cook. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook. Thanks for listening.